Hi everyone, we are Johnny and Roberta from Synchronicity Center for Modern Mindfulness and Awakening, and we'd like to welcome you to episode 8 of Introduction to Practical Buddhism and Mindfulness Meditation. This series is intended to give you an easy to understand overview of core Buddhist philosophy and provide you with simple tools to apply it to daily modern life.
So today we are going to continue our exploration of the Noble Eightfold Path, after taking a short break last episode to begin explaining to you what meditation is all about. Now, if you've been following the series, we hope that you have accepted our challenge to begin your own meditation practice and have begun to meditate regularly, at least 10 to 20 minutes each day. And just remember, we feel that meditation is truly necessary for putting into practice all of the wisdom and knowledge that we are presenting to you throughout this series. And as we mentioned last episode, most of these concepts must be experienced for you to truly grasp a deep understanding of them. And this is actually done through meditation. So once again, please reach out to us if you have any questions at all about anything we've already discussed or any content that we will be covering in the future as well.
And as a reminder, please subscribe to our channel, follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and if you are at all able to support the work we are doing with Synchronicity Center, as we are a 501c3 nonprofit organization, please consider making a small donation through our website, synchronicitycenter.org. And we would like to thank all of those who have already so generously contributed, and it has helped tremendously. So let's get started.
Hey. Okay, guys, so within the Eightfold Path, the section on training in morality or ethical conduct, also known as sila in the Pali language, is what we will be covering next. This encompasses the steps of right speech, also known as wise or skillful speech, right action, and right livelihood.
Now, at first glance, one may consider that this section of training is all about practicing with the intention of just being a good person, and the positive effect that would have on others in all that we do in our lives. Now, while this is certainly a wonderful result of practicing in this area, we have to keep in mind that the overall goal of the Eightfold Path is liberating ourselves from, or even just alleviating, the suffering that we and others experience.
Therefore, practicing the steps of ethical conduct doesn't just lead us through life simply as a guide to moral action. It is just so much more than that. Especially when you're already embodying the first two steps of right view and right intention that we discussed in our previous episodes, practicing ethical conduct has the ultimate effect of aiding in the purification of our minds, which is essential in the practice of our last area of training in samadhi, or mental discipline. Now, this is what will lead you along this ultimate path to awakening or enlightenment.
So to explain a bit further, the notion of morality from a Western sense is quite different than the understanding in Buddhist philosophy. In Western ethics, it has a connotation which lends one to feeling a sense of commitment or obligation and restraining oneself, probably due to its conceptual background within a religious or theistic sense.
But as you'll come to understand, that Buddhism is a non-theistic tradition. Therefore, the notion of morality or ethics is not practiced as obligation or obedience in answering to some higher being or power, but rather it's practiced on the basis of achieving harmony.
In several commentaries on the Buddhist teaching, when talking about this training area of sila, it is often explained with the Pali word samadhana, which means harmony or coordination. And that is harmony or coordination on several different levels. These levels include social, psychological, or mental, karmic, or actionable, and contemplative levels.
So as far as harmony on a social level, this would be harmony involving the personal relationships that we have with ourselves and all others, as well as the unification of all different members of a society in a balanced order, where personal disagreements and conflict are at a minimum, if not eradicated completely. Now, wouldn't that be wonderful? Just total peace and harmony.
The second level would be psychological or mental harmony, and this entails establishing harmony and equanimity of the mind by releasing oneself from guilty or regretful feelings that may be lingering from wrongdoings or misbehaviors that have occurred in the past.
And then, on an actionable or karmic level, we are talking about inducing harmony by the morality of your decisions. Now, these decisions affect the constantly evolving karmic chains of action that we are continuously setting into motion, each with different trajectories, causes, and effects within this infinitely interdependent cosmic system. Now, as we've mentioned previously, we will be explaining this commonly misunderstood concept of karma or kama much more in depth in an upcoming episode.
But for now, in talking about the last level of contemplative development of Sila, we were referring to the way in which the practice can assist with creating that initial harmony and purification of the mind. It is that initial harmony which then leads to the development of deeper mind states, and in a systematic way begins cultivating the serenity and insight necessary for practice of the next area of training in mental discipline.
So, moving on a bit further in ethical conduct, you may have heard of the 5 precepts, or training rules for a layperson practicing the Buddhist path. These are probably the largest overall part of training in Sila, or ethical conduct and morality. And one that decides to take refuge in following Buddhist teachings can also ceremoniously take or commit to following the 5 precepts.
Now, these precepts, or training rules, are woven within the Eightfold Noble Path, mainly within the 3 steps of speech, action, and livelihood, as guidelines for the driving forces behind our bodily and mental actions. It's important to be noted that these are not set moral codes to follow or any absolute laws of every given situation, but rather meant to be viewed as guidelines to refrain or abstain from while practicing the Buddhist path. And these are all once again followed with the intention of how they aid one in walking the path towards one day achieving awakening or enlightenment.
Now, many times people may see these as negatively worded in that you are to abstain or refrain from them. But when we look deeper, each aspect is actually composed of both the abstaining from unwholesome action as well as committing to cultivating its opposite, or wholesome action.
Let's look briefly at the 5 precepts. They are simply put to abstain or refrain from killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, false, harsh, or idle speech, and intoxicants that could cloud the mind. Now, we will break the first 4 of these down as they appear within each step of the trainings in Sila or ethical conduct, beginning with right speech, also known as wise or skillful speech.
So, right speech can best be understood in the way we communicate with ourselves and others. How we communicate is an essential part of creating a peaceful and harmonious life. We are social creatures, and our communication is probably the most important part of human relations.
Right speech is referring to communicating with others in a way that doesn't intentionally cause harm, is truthful, meaningful, is not idle, useless, or careless, and is always spoken at the right place and at the right time. Now, as applicable to our modern day society, this covers not only actual speech, but all forms of communication that we use these days, such as writing, texting, emailing, Facebooking, or even audio and video.
Now, lying, gossiping, and harshly insulting others are certainly and pretty obviously not examples of right speech. But at the same time, neither are making compliments to others that you may not actually mean, or promises you make but have absolutely no intention of keeping, or even disingenuously being nice to or just kissing someone's backside that you simply want to impress or gain something from.
As far as the precepts are concerned, refraining from lying, harsh or idle speech would fall under this step. In thinking about right speech, it helps to consider why you say something as much as what you are actually saying. This is where the step of the path intertwines with the steps of right view and right intention, as your speech and actions are directly related to your understanding of and intentions related to each situation that you are in.
In all cases, right speech does not always have to be pleasant or nice speech, nor does it need to withhold ideas or opinions out of being fearful that someone might disagree with you. More importantly, it should always be skillful, sincere, and genuine, with an intention to help or benefit the person being communicated with.
So, the negative and positive sides of right speech could be seen as don't lie or don't say harmful, hurtful things, as well as strive to be truthful and maintain the intention to say kind and compassionate things. It can also be said that if you don't have something nice or kind to say, you can skillfully choose to maintain that noble silence and say nothing at all.
It's a much better way to go. And that leads us to the next step, known as right, wise, or skillful action or conduct. Now, what the Buddha is referring to here is doing whatever action is proper and appropriate for each and every situation that you encounter throughout your life experience. And specifically, performing actions that encourage moral and noble conduct, overall aimed at promoting that peace and harmony. Now, this incorporates the precepts of refraining or abstaining from taking life, stealing, dishonesty, and illegitimate sexual relations.
And once again, it is not a set moral code to be followed to the letter. And this is really important to understand. The biggest problem with attempting or being expected to follow a set moral code, especially one that was devised hundreds or even thousands of years ago, is that morals tend to change and evolve over the course of time and in different places and cultures.
So therefore, trying to adhere to the expectations of morality from another place and time entirely may not actually be the most skillful action or conduct to be following in the actual modern day time and place in which we currently abide. And as we all have seen at one time or another, what is considered right and wrong is often very subjective.
Especially with different types of societies or even time periods. What may be totally acceptable in one society or time could oftentimes be totally unacceptable in another. All of our lives and world circumstances are continually changing and evolving. Therefore, right action should not be considered an absolute thing or a set moral code.
No, everything's impermanent. Also, it's an important consideration that, as we know, none of us are perfect, and we may perform an unskillful action or speak unkindly or unskillfully from time to time. The important thing is that we recognize it and try to reconcile any harm that may have been caused.
We can then resolve to learn from our failures in hopes to prevent them from recurring in the future. But ultimately, there is no need to cling to them and shoulder any guilt longer than necessary. That would simply be shooting ourselves with the second, third, and fourth arrows of pervasive suffering, in which we talked about in the previous episode on the fournobletruths.
So, just to summarize up until now, the first 4 steps of the Eightfold Path can be simply linked together, and that right, or skillful understanding or view, gives rise to right intention, which then gives rise to right speech and right action, where your wisdom and knowledge leads you to behave appropriately in any scenario you encounter.
See how easy it is?
Yeah.
Next, we move on to the last step in the training of ethical conduct, right livelihood, also known as wise or skillful livelihood. This step has to do with how we make a living and how we interact with others while we are on the job.
Now, ideally, we should abstain from making a living or performing a job or in a profession that ultimately brings harm to others. We should rather intend and strive to work in a profession that we consider honorable, one without causation of inheriting blame, and where we are innocent of any intentional harm caused to others.
First and foremost, in regard to this step as a basis of ethical and moral conduct, it's important for us to determine for ourselves if what we do for a living is causing more harm or good for ourselves and others. This goes beyond just the type of job or career we have.
So a perfect example would be someone who is a drug dealer versus someone who is a medical doctor. Now, both dispense or prescribe medicines, but with different intention and terms of legality. However, it goes well beyond just the type of profession.
An example of this would be that same doctor, though in a noble and helpful profession, may be actually causing harm by taking bribes from pharmaceutical companies to prescribe one medicine over another, or ordering unnecessary tests and treatments for the sake of making more money.
Insurance fraud.
This would then make that doctor a prime example of unwise or unskillful livelihood.
Exactly. So the considerations of the job or profession we have also includes how we interact with our superiors, our coworkers, and our customers. So embezzling funds from your employer, for example, would also be another very serious example of unwise livelihood.
Likewise, through the Buddhist lens, other ways people make a living, such as in arms dealing, killing or harming animals, manufacturing that produces toxic wastes or chemicals that are not properly disposed of and ultimately cause harm to our environment. These are also pretty obvious examples of unskillful livelihood.
So it should be noted, however, that it's ultimately up to each one of us to make the judgment call regarding the way we make a living for ourselves and whether or not we feel it is morally or ethically acceptable in your view. It's a good idea to incorporate right intention in this process of self-reflection. Perhaps you can ask yourself, why is it that I am doing what I'm doing?
And remember, it's not necessarily about picking some noble or heroic career, or only a job that does charitable work or something of that nature. It's about doing what you do with the best intention not to cause harm to others, regardless of what your job is.
So, just reflecting back on the 5 precepts for a moment, we talked about how the first 4 precepts are pretty clearly encompassed within the steps we just discussed under the trainings of ethical conduct. But as a brief side note, we'd like to touch on the 5th precept, which has to do with refraining from ingesting intoxicants that cloud the mind, such as things like alcohol or illegal drugs.
Now, this precept has a lot to do with practicing in the next area of training in samadhi or mental discipline, and that we will explain much deeper in the next episode. But I'm sure you can imagine that it is pretty difficult to be concentrated and mindful when your mind is clouded or inebriated due to a mind-altering substance.
Obviously. But we would like to point out, though, that there is a component of intoxication that does have a moral and ethical background as well. The Buddha often talked about one of the effects of intoxicants is that they can lead to heedlessness.
And as far as that is concerned, it could most definitely inhibit one's ability to practice any of the steps on this path to awakening or enlightenment, especially the steps we just discussed concerning ethical and moral conduct.
I mean, seriously, all you have to do is reflect upon some of the questionable and or regretful decisions and actions that either you yourself or maybe someone you know may have made while under the influence of alcohol or drugs.
So that about wraps up this episode on training in the area of sila, known as ethical or moral conduct. We explained to you the difference in the purpose for these trainings from a Western sense versus a Buddhist sense. And you should now understand that the practice is not performed out of a sense of obligation to a higher power, but as a means of achieving harmony on several different levels, as well as aiding in purification of one's mind. And that this harmony and purification serves as a solid foundation for the next trainings in samadhi or mental discipline.
You should now also have a pretty clear understanding of what the steps of right speech, right action, and right livelihood entail. And likewise, we introduced you to the 5 precepts or training rules that a Buddhist layperson can follow on their path to awakening, and how those guidelines are interwoven within training in morality.
And as we just mentioned, for our next episode, we will move on to the last training area of the Eightfold Path, mental discipline or samadhi, where we will discuss right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. As always, we hope you learned something new or even slightly different perspective to something you may have already known.
And please do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. You should be able to just click on the little Synchronicity Center circle on the top right of your screen to easily do that. And please do follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Also check out our website, synchronicitycenter.org, where you can schedule private sessions with us, as well as sign up for our newsletter to keep up to date with all of these wonderful things that we're up to.
And while you're there, if it is at all within your means, please feel free to become one of our supporters and contribute a small tax-deductible donation via PayPal or our Facebook donate buttons, as it will truly help for us to produce more content like this in the future and support all the work we are doing. And again, much merit and many thanks to those who have so generously contributed already. Thank you.
But for today, as always, we will leave you with our wishes for loving kindness or metta. May you all be happy. May you all be well. May you all be safe and free from suffering this day and every day.
Thank you.